All right, we are moving on to Chapter 5 of Slaughterhouse 5. I will warn you, I believe this chapter is a little bit longer, so we might have to pause, take a few water breaks. I apologize in advance. I am going to try reading this also faster. Let's get into it. Billy Pilgrim said that the universe does not look like a lot of bright little dots to the creatures from Tralmafador. The creatures can see where each star has been and where it is going, so that the heavens are filled with rare-field, luminous spaghetti. And Tralmafadorians don't see human beings as two-legged creatures either. They see them as great millipedes with baby legs at one end and old people's legs at the other, said Billy Pilgrim. Billy asked for something to read on the trip to Tralmafadorian. His captors had 5 Earthling books on microfilm, but no way to project them in Billy's cabin. They only had one actual book in English, which would be placed in a Tralmafadorian museum. It was The Doll of Valleys by Jacqueline Susan. Billy read it, thought it was pretty good in spots. The people in it certainly had their ups and downs. But Billy didn't want to read about the same ups and downs over and over again. He asked if there wasn't, please, some other reading matters around. Only Tralmafadorian novels, and I'm afraid you wouldn't begin to understand, said the speaker on the wall. Let me look at one anyways. They sent him several. There were little things. A dozen of them might have had the bulk of Valley of the Dolls, with all of its ups and downs. Billy couldn't read Tralmafadorian, of course, but he could at least see how the books were laid out in brief clumps of symbols separated by stars. Billy commented that the clumps might be telegrams. Exactly, said the voice. They are telegrams. No, there are no telegrams on Tralmafador, but you're right. Each clump of the symbols is a brief, urgent message describing a situation, a scene. We Tralmafadorians read them all at once, not one after the other. There isn't any particular relationship between all of the messages, except that the author has chosen them carefully, so that, when all at once, they produce an image of life that is beautiful and surprising and deep. There is no beginning, no middle, no end, no suspense, no moral, no causes, no effects. What we love in our books are depths of how many marvelous moments seen all at one time. Moments after that, the saucer entered a time warp, and Billy was flung back into his childhood. He was 12 years old, quaking as he stood with his mother and father on Bright Angel Point, at the rim of the Grand Canyon. The little family was staring at the floor of the canyon, 1 mile straight down. Well, said Billy's father, manfully kicking a pebble into space, there it is. They had come from the famous place by automobile. They had placed several blowouts on the way. It was worth the trip, said Billy's mother raptly. Oh, God, was it ever worth it? Billy hated the canyon. He was sure that he was going to fall in. His mother touched him, and he wet his pants. There were other tourists looking down at the canyon, too, and a ranger was there to answer questions. A Frenchman who had come all the way from France asked the ranger in broken English if many people committed suicide by jumping in. Yes, sir, said the ranger. About 3 folks a year. So it goes. Billy took another short trip through time, made a pee-wee jump only of 10 days, when he was still 12, still touring the West with his family. Now they were down in Carlsbad Caverns, and Billy was praying to God to get him out of there before the ceiling fell in. A ranger was explaining that the caverns had been discovered by a cowboy who saw a huge cloud of bats come out of a hole in the ground. And then he was going to turn out the lights, and that would probably be the first time in the lives of most people that they had ever been in darkness that was total. Out went the lights. Billy didn't even know whether he was alive or not. Then something ghostly floated in the air to the left. It had numbers on it. His father had taken out his pocket watch. The watch had a radium dial. Billy went from total dark to total light, found himself back in the war, back off in the delousing station again. The shower was over. An unseen hand turned the water off. When Billy got his clothes back, they weren't any cleaner, but all the little animals that had been living in them were dead. So it goes. And his new overcoat was thawed and limp now. It was much too small for Billy, but it had a fur collar and crimson silk, and apparently had made an impression about as big as an organ grinder's monkey. It was full of bullet holes. Billy dressed himself. He put on a little overcoat. It split up in the back, and the shoulders and the sleeves came completely free. So the coat became a fur-collared vest. It was meant to flare at its owner's waist, but the flaring took place at Billy's armpits. The Germans found him to be one of the most seemingly funny things they had ever seen in all of the Second World War. They laughed and laughed. And the Germans were told everybody to form in ranks of 5 with Billy as their pivot. Then out the doors went the parade through gate after gate again. There were more starving Russians with faces like radium dials. The Americans were livelier than before. The jazzing hot water had cheered them up, and they came to a shed where a corporal with only one arm and one eye wrote the same name and the serial number of each prisoner in big red ledger. Everyone was legally alive now. Before they got their names and numbers in the book, they were missing in action and probably dead. So it goes. As the Americans were waiting to move on, an altercation broke out in their rearmost rank. An American had muttered something which a guard did not like. The guard knew English, and he hauled the American off out of ranks, knocked him down. The American was astonished. He stood up shakily, spitting out blood. He'd had 2 teeth knocked out. He had meant no harm by what he said. Evidently, had no idea what the guard would hear and understand. "Why me?" he asked the guard. The guard shoved him back into ranks. "Why you? Why anybody?" he said. When Billy Pilgrim's name was inscribed in the ledger of the prison camp, he was given a number 2 and an iron dog tag in which the number was stamped. A slave laborer from Poland had done the stamping. He was dead now. So it goes. Billy was told to hang the tag around his neck along with his American dog tags, which he did. The tag was like a salt cracker, perforated down in its middle so that a strong man could snap it in 2 with his bare hands. In case Billy died, which he didn't, half the tag would mark his dead body and half would mark his grave. After poor Edgar Derby, the high school teacher who was shot in Dresden later on, a doctor pronounced him dead and snapped his dog tag in 2. So it goes. Properly enrolled and tagged, the Americans were led through gate after gate again. In 2 days' time, now their families would learn from the International Red Cross that they were alive. Next to Billy was Paul Lazaro, who had promised to avenge Ronald Rary. Lazaro wasn't thinking about vengeance. He was thinking about his terrible bellyache. His stomach had shrunk to the size of a walnut. That dry, shriveled pouch was as sore as a boil. Next to Lazaro was poor and doomed Edgar Derby, and his American and German dogs displayed like a necklace on the outside of his clothes. He had expected to become a captain, a company commander, because of his wisdom and age. Now he was on the Czechoslovakian border at night. "Halt," said the guard. The Americans halted. They stood quietly in the cold. The sheds they were among were outwardly like thousands of other sheds they had passed. There was this difference, though. The shed had tin chimneys, and out of the chimneys whirled constellations of sparks. A guard knocked on the door. The door flung open from the inside. Light leaped out through the door, escaped from prison at 186,000 miles per second. Out marched 50 middle-aged Englishmen. They were singing "Hail, Hail, the gang's all here" from Pirates of Penzance. These lusty, ruddy vocalists were among the first English-speaking prisoners to be taken to the Second World War. Now they were singing to nearly the last. They had not seen a woman or a child for 4 years or more. They had not seen birds either. Not even sparrows would come into the camp. The Englishmen were officers. Each of them had attempted to escape from another prison at least once. Now they were here, dead-centered in the sea of dying Russians. They could tunnel all they pleased. They would evidently surface within a rectangle of barbed wire, find themselves greeted listlessly by dying Russians who spoke no English, who had no food or useful information or escape plans of their own. They could scheme all they pleased to hide abroad in a vehicle or steal one, but no vehicle ever came to their compound. They could feign illness if they liked, but that wouldn't earn them a trip anywhere either. The only hospital in camp was a 6-bed affair in the British compound itself. The Englishmen were clean and enthusiastic and decent and strong. They sang boomingly well. They had been singing together every night for years. The Englishmen had also been lifting weights and chinning themselves for years. Their bellies were like washboards, the muscles of their calves and upper arms were like cannonballs. They were masters of checkers and chess and bridge and cribbage and dominoes and anagrams and charades and ping pong and billiards as well. They were among the wealthiest people in Europe in terms of food. A clerical error early in the war, when food was still getting through to prisoners, had caused the Red Cross to ship them 500 parcels every month instead of 50. The Englishmen had hoarded these so cunningly that now, as the war was ending, they had 3 tons of sugar, 1 ton of coffee, 11 pounds of chocolate, 1,100 pounds of chocolate, 700 pounds of tobacco, 1,700 pounds of tea, 2 tons of flour, 1 ton of canned beef, 1,200 pounds of canned butter, 1,600 pounds of canned cheese, 800 pounds of powdered milk, and 2 tons of orange marmalade. They kept all of this in a room without windows. They had rat-proofed it by lining it with flattened tin cans. They were adored by the Germans, who thought they were exactly what the Englishmen ought to be. They made war look stylish and reasonable and fun. So the Germans let them have their 4 sheds, though one shed would have held them all. And, in exchange for coffee or chocolate or tobacco, the Germans gave them paint and lumber and nails and cloth for fixing things up. The Englishmen had known for 12 hours that American guests were on their way. They never had guests before, and they went to work like darling elves, sweeping, mopping, cooking, baking, making mattresses of straw and burlap sacks, setting tables, putting party favors in each place. Now they were singing their welcome to their guests in the winter night. Their clothes were aromatic with the feast that they had been preparing. They were dressed half for battle, half for tennis or croquet. They were elated by their own hospitality and by all the goodies waiting inside. That they did not they didn't take a good look at their guests while they sang, and they imagined they were all singing to fellow officers fresh from the fray. They wrestled the Americans towards the shed affectionately, filling the night with manly banther and brotherly rhodomontades. They called them Yank, told them good show, promised them that Jerry was on the run, and so on. Billy wondered dimly who Jerry was. So, I feel like this is a callback to the first chapter. It was like the first or second chapter. But when the author, so when Kurt Vonnegut went to his war buddy's house, and the wife said, "You'll glorify war." War buddy wife said, because I feel like this whole conversation about these Englishmen that have made their peace, is this true? Because this is, as we know, the author did live through the Dresden bombing. So did he also live through this? Is this a way of saying that sometimes you need to make the best out of a bad situation? So can we say with this page, essentially, is the author glorifying war? I personally do not think that he is glorifying war, but I think these few paragraphs right here can definitely say that. Now, he was indoors next to an iron cook stove that was glowing cherry red. Sorry, my apartment just... sent me a message. Give me 1 second. Yeah, the whole building is out. Okay. Now he was indoors next to an iron cook stove that was glowing cherry red. Dozens of teapots were boiling there. Some of them had whistles, and there was a witch's cauldron full of golden soup. The soup was thick. Primeval bubbles surfaced with lethargical majesty as Billy Pilgrim stared. There were long tables set for the banquet. At each place was a bowl made from each can that had once contained powdered milk. A smaller can was a cup. A taller, more slender one was a tumbler. Each tumbler was filled with warm milk. At each place there was a safety razor, a washcloth, a package of razor blades, a chocolate bar, 2 cigars, a box of soap, 10 cigarettes, a book of matches, a pencil, and a candle. Only the candles and the soap were of German origin. They had a ghostly, opalescent similarity. The British had no way of knowing this, but the candles and soap were made from the fat of rendered Jews and gypsies and fairies and communists and other enemies of the state. So it goes. I'm going to be honest. I don't know if that's true about during wartime, like if there was any German soap being passed around. I don't know if that's true or not, but for your argumentative CER, stuff like this would be, like, this is controversial. Because, like, I didn't learn this in K through 12. I didn't learn this in college. I didn't learn about the Dresden bombings in college. That this is a controversial, this is all controversial. This whole book is controversial. But this right here, it's been mentioned twice now. And it does stand out to me as being, it makes it skeptical, and it makes it, it's something that you guys can look up. And if it does hold validity in some form or another, then, yeah, use that for your CER. This is a whole World War II novel that World War II is controversial. There's controversy in every aspect. I don't think any country was able to avoid the controversy of a world war. The banquet hall was illuminated by candlelight. There were heaps of fresh-baked white bread on the tables, gobs of butter, pots of marmalade. There were platters of sliced beef from cans. Soups and scrambled eggs and hot marmalade pie were yet to come. And, at the far end of the shed, Billy saw pink arches with azure draperies hanging between them, an enormous clock, and 2 golden thrones, and a bucket and a mop. It was in this setting that the evening's entertainment would take place, a musical version of Cinderella, the most popular story ever told. Billy Pilgrim was on fire, having stood too close to the glowing stove. The hem of his little coat was burning. It was a quiet, patient sort of fire like the burning of punk. Billy wondered if there was a telephone somewhere. He wanted to call his mother to know he was alive and well. There was silence now as the English looked in astonishment at the frowsy creatures they had so lustfully waltzed inside. One of the Englishmen saw Billy was on fire. "You're on fire, lad," he said, and he got Billy away from the stove and beat out the sparks with his hand. When Billy made no comment on this, the Englishman asked him, "Can you talk? Can you talk? Can you hear?" He nodded. The Englishman touched him exploratorily here and there, filled with pity. "My God, what have they done to you? This isn't a man. This is a broken kite." "Are you really American?" said the Englishman. "Yes. What is your rank?" "Private." "What have become of your boots, lad?" "I don't remember." "Is that coat a joke, sir? Where did you get such a thing?" Billy had to think about that. "They gave it to me," he said at last. "Jerry gave it to you." "Who?" "The Germans gave it to you." "Yes." Billy didn't like questions. They were fatiguing. "Oh, yank, yank, yank," said the Englishman. "That coat is an insult, sir. It was a deliberate attempt to humiliate you. You mustn't let Jerry do things like that." Billy Pilgrim swooned. Billy was on a chair facing the stage. He had somehow eaten, and now he was watching Cinderella. Some part of him had evidently had been enjoying the performance for a while. Billy was laughing hard. The women in the play were really men, of course. The clock had just struck midnight, and Cinderella was lamenting, Goodness me, the clock has struck. Alackaday, and fuck my luck. Billy found the couplet so comical that he not only laughed, he shrieked. He went on shrieking until he was carried out of the shed and into another, where the hospital was. It was a 6-bed hospital. There weren't any other patients in there. Billy was put to bed and tied down and given a shot of morphine. Another American soldier volunteered to watch over him. This volunteer was Edgar Derby, the high school teacher who would be shot to death in Dresden. So it goes. Derby sat on a 3-legged stool. He was given a book to read. The book was The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. Derby had read it before. Now he read it again while Billy Pilgrim entered morphine paradise. Under morphine, Billy had a dream of giraffes in the garden. The giraffes were following the gravel paths, were pausing to munch sugar pears from treetops. Billy was a giraffe too. He ate a pear. It was a hard one. It fought back against his grinding teeth. It snapped in juicy protest. The giraffes accepted Billy as one of their own, as a harmless creature preposterously specialized as themselves. Two approached him from opposite sides, leaned against him. They had long, muscular upper lips, which they could shape like the bells of bungles. They kissed him with these. They were female giraffes, cream and lemon yellow. They had horns and doorknobs. The knobs were covered in velvet. Why? Night came to the garden for the giraffe, and Billy slept without dreaming for a while, and then he traveled in time. He woke up with his head under a blanket in a ward for nonviolent mental patients in a veterans hospital near Lake Placid, New York. It was springtime in 1948, 3 years after after the end of the war. Let's take a break and talk about this. So does he, I think he's only becomes unstuck in time when conscious. Which means it's a PTSD response, like we've been talking about. But then, I didn't mean to double click that. This is the connection, because he got hospitalized in the war, and then he got hospitalized after the war. That probably when he went into the mental health facility, he thought back to the war and tried making that connection, because it's some way for familiarity. Billy uncovered his head. The windows of the ward were open. Birds were twittering outside. "Pooty wheat?" asked one of them. The sun was high. There was 29 other patients assigned to the ward, but they were outdoors now, enjoying the day. They were free to come and go as they pleased, to home even, if they liked. And so was Billy Pilgrim. They had come here voluntarily, alarmed by the outside world. Billy had committed himself in the middle of his final year at the Ilium School of Optometry. Nobody else suspected he was going crazy. Everybody else thought he looked fine and was acting fine. Now he was in the hospital. The doctors agreed. He was going crazy. They didn't think it had anything to do with the war. They were sure Billy was going to pieces because his father had thrown him into the deep end of the YMCA swimming pool when he was just a little boy, and had taken care of him and had taken him to the rim of the Grand Canyon. The man assigned to the bed next to Billy's was a former infantry captain named Elliot Rosewater. Rosewater was sick and tired of being drunk all the time. It was Rosewater who introduced Billy to science fiction, in particular to the writings of Kilgore Trout. Rosewater had a tremendous collection of science fiction paperbacks under his bed. He had brought them to the hospital in his steamer trunk. Those beloved, frumpish books gave off a smell that permeated the ward-like flannel pajamas that hadn't changed for a month. Or like Irish stew. This is just a fun fact about the author. If you do like this book, which I'm a big fan of the Vonnegut books, Elliot Rosewater is the main character in another book by Vonnegut called God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater. And that is a book about income inequality and like the wealth gap disparity is a better word for it. And Kilgore Trout is he's a character that appears in like a lot of the Vonnegut books. Anyways, that's just me being a book nerd. We'll continue. Kilgore Trout became Billy's favorite living author, and science fiction became only sort of tales he could read. Rosewater was twice as smart as Billy, but he and Billy were dealing with similar crises in similar ways. They both found life meaningless, partly because of what they had seen in the war. Rosewater, for instance, had shot a 14-year-old fireman, mistaking him for a German soldier. So it goes. And Billy had seen the greatest massacre in European history, which is the firebombing of Dresden. So it goes. So they were fighting to reinvent themselves and their universe. Science fiction was a big help. Mr. Rosewater had said an interesting thing to Billy one time about a book that wasn't science fiction. He said that everything there was to know about life was in the brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. But that isn't enough anymore, said Rosewater. Another time, Billy heard Rosewater say to a psychiatrist, I think you guys are going to have to come up with a lot of wonderful new lies, or people just aren't going to want to go on living. There was still life on Billy's bedside table, 2 pills, an ashtray with 3 lip-stained cigarettes in it, 1 cigarette still burning, and a glass of water. The water was dead, so it goes. The air was trying to get out of the dead water. Bubbles were clinging into the walls of glass, too weak to climb out. The cigarettes belonged to Billy's chain-smoking mother. She had sought the ladies' room, which is often the ward for the WACs and the waves and the spars and the wafts and who had gone bananas. She would be back at any moment now. Billy covered his head with his blanket again. He always covered his head when his mother came in to see him in the mental ward. Always got much sicker until she went away. It wasn't that she was ugly or had bad breath or had a bad personality. She was a perfectly nice, standard-issued, brown-haired white woman with a high school education. She upset Billy simply by being his mother. She made him feel embarrassed and ungrateful and weak because she had gone to do so much trouble to give him life. And to keep that life going, Billy didn't like life at all. Billy heard Elliot Rosewater come in and lie down. Rosewater's bed springs talked a lot about that. Rosewater was a big man, but not very powerful. He looked as though he might be made out of nose putty. And then Billy's mother came back into the ladies' room, sat down on a chair between Billy and Rosewater's bed. Rosewater greeted her with melodious warmth, asked how her day was. He seemed delighted to hear that she was fine. He was experimenting with being ardently sympathetic with everyone he met. He thought that might make the world a slightly more pleasant place to live. He called Billy's mother dear. It was something he was experimenting, calling everybody dear. Which that would also come into play in the book. I'm sorry, but I'll continue. Someday, she promised Rosewater, I'm going to come in here and Billy is going to uncover his head. And you know what he's going to say? What's he going to say? Dear. He's going to say, hello, Mom. And he's going to smile. And he's going to say, gee, it's good to see you, Mom. How have you been? Today could be the day. Every night I pray. That's a good thing to do. People would be surprised if they knew much in this world was due to prayers. You never said a truer word, dear. How does your mother Does your mother come to see you often? My mother is dead, said Rosewater. So it goes. I'm sorry. At least she had a happy life at the end as it lasted. That's a consolation anyway. Yes. Billy's father's dead, said Billy's mother. So it goes. A boy needs a father. And on and went. That duet between the dumb, praying lady and a big, hollow man full of loving echoes. Maybe he was at the top of his class when this happened, said Billy's mother. Maybe he was working too hard, said Rosewater. He held a book he wanted to read, but he was much too polite to read and talk too. Easy as it was to give Billy's mother satisfactory answers, the book was Maniacs in the Fourth Dimension by Kilgore Trout. It was about people whose mental diseases couldn't be treated because the causes of diseases were all in the fourth dimension, and three-dimensional Earthlings doctors couldn't see those causes, or even imagine it. One thing Trout had said Rosewater liked very much is that there really were vampires and werewolves and goblins and angels and so on. But they were in the fourth dimension. So like William Blake, Rosewater's favorite poet, according to Trout, so were heaven and hell. So one thing that I feel like I've noticed, but I just haven't called out, is this phrase right here. So it goes. The author always uses this quote after discussing death. Accepting, or I wouldn't say that it's 100% accepting. I think it's just coming to terms. And I think there's a difference between coming to terms and accepting. He's engaged to a very rich girl, said Billy's mother. I'm sorry. I thought that I didn't read the paragraph before. That's good, said Mr. Rosewater. Money can be a great comfort sometimes. It really can. Of course it can. It isn't much fun if you have to pinch every penny till it screams. It's nice to have a little breathing room. Her father owns the optometry school where Billy is going. He also owns 6 offices around our part of the state. He flies his own plane and has a summer place up in Lake George. That's a beautiful lake. Billy fell asleep under his blanket. When he woke up again, he was tied to the bed in the hospital back in prison. He opened one eye, saw poor old Edgar Derby reading The Red Badge of Courage by candlelight. Billy closed one eye, saw his memory of the future poor old Edgar Derby in the front of a firing squad in the ruins of Dresden. There were only 4 men in the squad. Billy had heard that one man in each firing squad was customarily given a rifle loaded with a blank cartridge. Billy didn't think that there would be a blank cartridge issued in a squad that small, in a war that old. Now the head Englishman came into the hospital to check on Billy. He was an infantry colonel captured at Dunkirk. It was he who had given Billy morphine. There wasn't a real doctor in the compound, so the doctoring was up to him. How's the patient? He asked. Dead to the world. But not actually dead. No. How nice to feel nothing and get full credit for being alive. Derby now came to lugubrious attention. No, please, as you were. With only 2 men for each officer and all men are sick, I think we can do without the usual pageantry between officers and men. Derby remained standing. You seem older than the rest, said the colonel. Derby told him he was 45, which was 2 years older than the colonel. The colonel said that the other Americans have all shaved now, that Billy and Derby were the only 2 with beards. He said, we'd have to imagine the war here, and we'd have to imagine that it was being fought by aging men like ourselves. We had forgotten that wars were fought by babies. When I saw those freshly shaven faces, it was a shock. My God, I said to myself. It's the children's crusade. The colonel asked Derby how he had been captured. The Derby told a tale of being in a clump of trees with about 100 other frightened soldiers. The battle had been going on for 5 days. The hundreds had been driven into the trees by tanks. Derby described the incredible artificial weather that Earthlings sometimes create for other Earthlings when they don't want those other Earthlings to inhabit Earth anymore. Shells were bursting in the treetops with terrific bangs, he said, showering down knives and needles and razor blades. Little lumps of lead and copper jackets were crisscrossing the woods under shell bursts, zipping along much faster than sound. A lot of people were being wounded or killed. So it goes. Then the shelling stopped, and a hidden German with a loudspeaker told the Americans to put their weapons down and come out of the woods with their hands on the top of their heads, or the shelling would start again. It wouldn't stop until everybody was dead. So the Americans put their weapons down, and they came out in the woods and with their hands on top of their heads because they wanted to go on living if they possibly could. Billy traveled back in time to the Veterans Hospital again. Did I read that wrong the whole time? I feel like I did. No, I didn't. Okay, weird. Billy traveled back in time to the Veterans Hospital again. The blanket was over his head. It was quite... Oh, the Veterans. Okay. That was my mistake. I thought that we were still in World War II, but we're back into the Veterans Hospital. Difference. It was quiet outside the blanket. "Is my mother gone?" said Billy. "Yes." Billy peeked out from under his blanket. His fiancée was out there now, sitting in the visitor's chair. Her name was Valencia Merble. Valencia was the daughter of the owner of the Ilium School of Optometry. She was rich. She was as big as a house because she couldn't stop eating. She was eating now. She was eating a Three Musketeers candy bar. She was wearing trifocal lenses and Harlequin frames, and the frames were trimmed with rhinestones. The glitter of the rhinestones was answered by the glitter of the diamond of her engagement ring. The diamond was insured for $1,800. Billy had found the diamond in Germany. It was booty of war. Billy didn't want to marry ugly Valencia. She was one of the symptoms of his disease. He knew he was going crazy. When he heard himself proposing marriage to her, when he begged her to take the diamond ring and be his companion for life. Billy said hello to her, and she asked if he wanted some candy, and he said no, thanks. She asked him where he was, and he said how he was, and he said, much better, thanks. She said everybody at the optometry school was sorry he was sick and hoped he would get well soon, and Billy said, when you see them, tell him hello. She promised she would. She asked him if there was anything she could bring him from the outside. He said, no, I have just about everything I want. What about books? I'm right next to one of the biggest private libraries in the world, said Billy, meaning Elliot Rosewater's collection of science fiction. Rosewater was on the next bed, reading, and Billy drew him into the conversation, asked him what he was reading at the time. So Rosewater told him. It was The Gospel from Outer Space by Kilgore Trout. It was about a visitor from outer space, shaped very much like a child Malfadorian, by the way. The visitor from outer space made a serious study of Christianity to learn, if he could, why Christians found it so easy to be cruel. He concluded that the least part of trouble was the slipshod storytelling of the New Testament. He supposed that the intent of the Gospels was to teach people, among other things, to be merciful, even in the lowest of lows. But the Gospel actually taught this. Before you kill somebody, make absolutely sure he isn't well connected. So it goes. Now, if we're also trying to make connections, like this line right here, it doesn't have to 100% be about killing, but just like if you're going to go after somebody, make sure that they're not well connected. Like we've seen this like in most recent times with all of the like really big cases like the Epstein files or the P. Diddy trials, like all of that type of stuff. Like those men in particular are very well connected that it's hard to bring them down and to find justice when they're that well connected. So if you want to make that connection, you can. Again, you just got to research it. The flaw in the Christ stories of the visitor from outer space was that Christ, who didn't look like much, was actually the son of the most powerful being in the universe. Readers understood that, so when they came to the crucifixion, they naturally thought, and Rosewater read out loud again, oh boy, they sure picked the wrong guy to lynch that time. That thought had a brother. There are right people to lynch. Who? People not well connected. So it goes. The visitor from outer space made a gift to Earth of a new gospel. In it, Jesus really was a nobody and a pain in the neck to a lot of people with better connections than he had. He still got to say all the lovely and puzzling things he said in the other gospels. So the people amused themselves one day by nailing him to a cross and planting the cross in the ground. There couldn't simply be any repercussions, the lynchers thought. The reader would have to think that, too, since the new gospel hammered home again and again what a nobody Jesus was. And then, just before nobody died, the heavens opened up and there was thunder and lightning. The voice of God came crashing down. He told the people that he was adopting the bum as his son, giving him full powers and privileges of the son of the creator of the universe throughout all eternity. God said, from this moment on, he will punish horribly anybody who torments a bum who has no connections. Billy's fiancée had finished her Three Musketeers bar. Now she was eating a Milky Way bar. Forget books, said Rosewater, throwing that particular book under the bed. The hell with them. That sounded like an interesting one, said Valencia. Jesus, if Kilgore could only write, Rosewater exclaimed. He had a point. Kilgore Trout's unpopularity was deserved. His prose was frightful. Only his ideas were good. I don't think Trout has ever been out of the country, Rosewater went on. My God, he writes about Earthlings all the time, and they're all Americans. Practically nobody on Earth is an American. Where does he live? Valencia asked. Nobody knows, Rosewater said. I'm the only person who's ever heard of him, as far as I can tell. No two books have the same publisher, and every time I write to him in care of the publisher, the letter comes back because the publisher has failed. He changed the subject now, congratulating Valencia on her engagement. Thank you, she said, and held it out so Rosewater could get a close look. Billy got that diamond in the war. That's an attractive thing about war, said Rosewater. Absolutely everybody gets a little something. With regard to the whereabouts of Kilgore Trout, he actually lived in Ilium, Billy's hometown, friendless and despised. Billy would meet him by and by. Billy, said Valencia Merble. You sure you want to talk about the silver pattern? Sure. I've got to narrow down pretty much to either Royal Danish or Rambler Rose. Rambler Rose, said Billy. It isn't something we can just rush into, she said. I mean, whatever we decide on, that's what we're going to have to live with the rest of our lives. Billy studied the pictures. Royal Danish, he said at last. Colonial moonlight is nice too. Yes, it is, said Billy Pilgrim. And Billy traveled in time to the zoo on Tralmaphador. He was 44 years old, on display in a geodesic dome. He was reclining on the lounge chair, which had been his cradle during the ship throughout space. He was naked. The Tralmaphadorians were interested in his body. All of it. There were thousands of them outside, holding up their little hands so that their eyes could see him. Billy had been on Tralmaphador for 6 earthling months now. He was used to the crowd. The escape was out of the option. The atmosphere was outside the dome was cyanide, and Earth was... Hold on. 100,000 million billion trillion, I forget what comes, whatever, miles away. Billy was displayed there in the zoo in a simulated Earth habitat. Most of the furnishings had been stolen from Sears and Roebuck Warehouse in Iowa City, Iowa. There was a color television set and a couch that would be converted into a bed. There were end tables with lamps and ashtrays on them by the couch. There was a home bar and 2 stools. There was a little pool table. There was wall-to-wall carpeting with federal gold, except for the kitchen and bathroom areas and over the iron manhole cover in the center of the floor. Magazines arranged in a fan on the coffee table in front of the couch. There was a stereophonic phonograph. The phonograph worked. The television didn't. There was a picture of a cowboy shooting one another pasted to the television tube. So it goes. There was no wall in the dome. There was no place for Billy to hide. The mint green bathroom fixture were right out in the open. Billy got off his lounge chair now, went into the bathroom and took a leak. The crowd went wild. Billy brushed his teeth on Tralmaphador, put on his partial denture, and went into his kitchen. His bottled gas range and his refrigerator and his dishwasher were mint green too. There was a picture painted on the door of the refrigerator. The refrigerator had come that way. There was a picture of a gay 90s couple on a bicycle built for 2. Billy looked at the picture now, tried to think of something about the couple. Nothing came to him. There didn't seem to be anything to think about those 2 people. Billy ate breakfast from cans. He washed his cup and plate and knife and fork and spoon and saucepan, put them away. What's that? Oh. Then he did his exercises he had learned in the army: straddle jumps, deep knee bends, sit-ups, and push-ups. Most trial Malfadorians had no way of knowing Billy's body and face were not beautiful. They supposed he was a splendid specimen. They had this pleasant effect on Billy. He began to enjoy his body for the first time. He showered after his exercises and trimmed his toenails. He shaved and sprayed deodorant under his arms, while the zoo guide on a raised platform outside explaining what Billy was doing and why. The guide was lecturing telepathically, simply standing there, sending out thought waves into the crowd. On the platform with him was a little keyboard instrument, which he would relay questions to Billy from the crowd. Now the first question came from the speaker on the television set. "Are you happy here?" About as happy as I was on Earth," said Billy Pilgrim, which was true. There were 5 sexes of child Malfadorian, each of them performing a necessary step in the creation of a new individual. They looked identical to Billy because their sex differences were all in the 4th dimension. One of the biggest moral bombshells handed to Billy by the child Malfadorians, incidentally, had to do with sex on Earth. They said their flying saucers crew had identified no fewer than 7 sexes on Earth, each essential to reproduction. Again, Billy couldn't possibly imagine what 5 of those 7 sexes had to do with making a baby, since they were sexually active only in the 4th dimension. The child Malfadorians tried to give Billy clues to help him imagine sex in the invisible dimension. They told him that there could be no earthling babies without male homosexuals. There could be no babies without female homosexuals. There could be no babies without women over 65 years old. There could be no babies without men over 65. There could be no babies without other babies who had lived an hour or less after birth. So it goes. It was gibberish to Billy. If we're talking about controversy, this is controversial. This is, so controversial, but there's the controversy highlighted. Let's move on. Okay. There was a lot that Billy said that was gibberish to the trial Malfadorians, too. They couldn't imagine what time looked like to him. Billy had given up on explaining that. The guide outside had to explain the best he could. The guide invited the crowd to imagine they were looking across a desert at a mountain range on a day that was twinkling bright and clear. They could look at a peak, or a bird, or a cloud, at a stone right in front of them, or even down in a canyon behind them. Among them there was a poor earthling, and his head was encased in a steel spear which he could never take off. There were only one eye hole through which he could see, and welded into that eye hole were 6 feet of pipe. This was only the beginning of Billy's miseries and metaphor. He was also strapped into a steel lattice which was bolted into a flat car on rails, and there was no way he could turn his head or touch the pipe. At the far end of the pipe rested on a bipod which was also bolted to the flat car. All Billy could see was the dot at the end of the pipe. He didn't know he was on a flat car, didn't even know there wasn't anything peculiar about his situation. The flat car sometimes crept, sometimes went on really fast, sometimes stopped, went uphill, downhill, around curves, along straightaways. Whatever poor Billy saw through that pipe, he had no choice but to say to himself, "That's life." Billy expected the child Malfadorians to be baffled and alarmed by all the wars and other forms of murder on Earth. He expected them to fear that the earthling combination of ferocity and spectacular weaponry might eventually destroy part or maybe all of the innocent universe. Science fiction led him to expect that. But the subject of war never came up until Billy brought it up himself. Somebody in the zoo asked him through the lecture what was the most valuable thing he had learned on Child Malfador so far, and he replied, "How the inhabitants of a whole planet can live in peace. I, as you know, am from a planet that has engaged in senseless slaughter since the beginning of time. I myself have seen bodies of schoolgirls who were boiled alive in a water tower of my own countrymen, who were proud of fighting pure evil at the time." This was true. Billy saw boiled bodies in Dresden. "And I have lit my way in prison at night with candles from the fats of human beings who were butchered by brothers and fathers of those schoolgirls who were now boiled. Earthlings must be the terrors of the universe. If other planets aren't now in danger of Earth, they will be soon. So tell me the secret that I can take back to Earth and save us all. How can a planet live at peace?" Billy felt he had spoken sorely. He was baffled when he saw the child Malfadorians close their eyes on their close their little hands on their eyes. He knew from past experience what he meant. He was stupid. Would you mind telling me? He said to the guide, much deflated. What's so stupid about that? We know how the universe ends, said the guide. The Earth has nothing to do with it, except that it gets wiped out, too. How? How does the universe end? Said Billy. We blow up. Experimenting using new fuels for our flying saucers. A trial Malfadorian pilot presses a starter button. The whole universe disappears. So it goes. If you know this, said Billy, if there isn't there some way you can prevent this? Can't you keep the pilot from pressing that button? He has always pressed it, and he always will. We always let him, and we always will. The moment is structured that way. So, said Billy gropingly, I suppose that the idea of preventing war on Earth is stupid too, of course. But you do have a peaceful planet here. Today we do. On other days we have wars as horrible as any you've seen or read about. There isn't anything we can do about them, so we simply don't look at them. We ignore them. We spend eternity looking at pleasant moments, like today in the zoo. Isn't this a nice moment? Yes. That's one thing Earthlings must learn to do. If they try hard enough, ignore the awful times and concentrate on the good ones. Said Billy Pilgrim. Shortly after they went to sleep that night, Billy traveled in time to another moment which was quite nice. His wedding with the former Valencia Merble. He had been out of the Veterans Hospital for 6 months. He was all well. He had graduated from Ilium School of Optometry, third of his class of 47. Now he was in bed with Valencia in a delightful studio apartment which was built at the end of the wharf in Cape Ann, Massachusetts. Across the water were the lights of Gloucester. Billy was on top of Valencia, making love to her. One result of this act would be the birth of Robert Pilgrim, who had become a problem in high school, but would straighten out as a member of the famous Green Berets. Valencia wasn't a time traveler, but she had a lively imagination. While Billy was making love to her, she imagined she was a famous woman in history. She was Queen Elizabeth I of England, and Billy was supposedly Christopher Columbus. Billy made a noise like a small, rusty hinge. He had just emptied his seminal vesicles into Valencia, had contributed his share of the Green Beret, according to the Child Malfadorians, of course. The Green Berets have 7 parents in all. Now he rolled off his huge wife, whose rapt expression did not change when he departed. He lay with the buttons of his spine along the edge of the mattress, folded his hands behind his head. He was rich now. He had been rewarded for marrying a girl nobody in his right mind would have married. His father-in-law had given him a new Buick Roadmaster, an all-electric home, and made a manager of his most prosperous office, his Ilium office, where Billy could expect to make at least $30,000 a year. That was good. His father had only been a barber. As his mother said, the Pilgrims are coming up in the world. The honeymoon was taking place in a bittersweet mysteries of Indian summer in New England. The lovers' apartment had one romantic wall, which was all French doors. They opened onto the balcony in the oily harbor beyond. A green and orange dragger, black in the night, grumbled and drummed past their balcony, not 30 feet from their wedding bed. It was going to the sea with only its lights on. Its empty holds were resonant, made the song of the engines rich and loud. The wharf began to sing the same song, and then the honeymooners' headboard sang it too. And it continued to sing long after the dragger was gone. Thank you, said Valencia. The headboard was singing a mosquito song. You're welcome. It was nice. I'm glad. She began to cry. What's the matter? I'm so happy. Good. I never thought anyone would marry me. I want to lose weight for you, she said. What? I'm going to go on a diet. I'm going to become beautiful for you. I like you just the way you are. Do you really? Really, said Billy Pilgrim. He'd already seen their marriage, thanks to the time travel, knew it was going to be at least bearable all the way. A great motor yacht named the Scheherazade now slid past the marriage bed. The song of its engine sang in a very low organ tone. All her lights were on. 2 beautiful people, a young man and a young woman in evening clothes, were at the rail at the stem, loving each other and their dreams in the wake. They were honeymooning too. They were Lance Rumford of Newport, Rhode Island, and his bride, Cynthia Landry, who had been a childhood sweetheart of John F. Kennedy in Hyannisport, Massachusetts. There was a slight coincidence here. Billy Pilgrim would later share a hospital room with Rumford's uncle, Professor Bertram Copeland Rumford of Harvard, official historian of the United States Air Force. When the beautiful people were passed, Valencia questioned her funny-looking husband about war. It was a simple-minded thing for a female earthling to do, to associate sex with the glamour of war. "Do you ever think about the war?" she said, laying a hand on his thigh. "Sometimes," said Billy Pilgrim. "I look at you sometimes," she said, "and I get a funny feeling you're full of secrets." "I'm not." That was a lie, of course. He hadn't told anyone at all about the time traveling he'd done, about Trial Mafador, and so on. You must have secrets about the war. Or not secrets, I guess, but things you don't want to talk about. No. I'm proud you were a soldier. Do you know that? Good. Was it awful? Sometimes. A crazy thought now occurred to Billy. The truth of it startled him. It would make a good epitaph for Billy Pilgrim, and for me too. "Would you talk about the war now, if I wanted you to?" said Valencia. It was a tiny cavity in her great body. She was assembling the materials of the Green Beret. "It would sound like a dream," said Billy. "Other people's dreams aren't really interesting usually. I heard you tell Father one time about a German firing squad." She was referring to the execution of poor old Edgar Derby. "You had buried him?" "Yes." "Did he see you with your shovels before he was shot?" "Yes." "Did he say anything?" "No." "Was he scared?" They had doped him up. He was sort of glassy-eyed. And they pinned a target on him? "A piece of paper," he said. He got out of bed, went into the darkness of the bathroom to take a leak. He groped for the light, realized as he fell through the rough wall that he had traveled back to 1944, to the prison hospital again. The candle in the hospital had gone out. Poor Edgar Derby had fallen asleep on the cot next to Billy's. Billy was out of bed, groping along the wall, trying to find a way out because he needed to take a leak really badly. He suddenly found a door, which opened, let him reel out of the prison night. Billy was loony with time travel and morphine. He delivered himself to a barbed wire fence, which snagged him in a dozen places. Billy tried to back away from it, but the barbs wouldn't let go. So Billy did a silly little dance with the fence, taking a step this way, then that, then returning to the beginning again. A Russian himself out of the night to take a leak, saw Billy dancing from the other side of the fence. He came over to the curious scarecrow, tried to talk with it gently, asked what country it was from. The scarecrow paid no attention, went on dancing. So the Russian undid the snags one by one, and the scarecrow danced off into the night again without a word of thanks. The Russian waved goodbye, and called after him in Russian, "Goodbye." Billy took his pecker out there in the prison night and peed into the ground. And when he put it away, more or less, had contemplated a new problem. Where had he come from? And where should he go now? Somewhere in the night, there were cries of grief. With nothing better to do, Billy shuffled in that direction. He wondered what tragedy so many had found to lament out the doors. When Billy was approaching without noticing it, it was the back of the latrine. It consisted of a one rail fence with 12 buckets beneath it. The fence was sheltered on three sides by the screen of the scrap lumber and flattened tin cans. The open side faced the black tar paper wall on the shed where the feast had taken place. Billy moved along the screen and reached a point where he could see a message freshly painted on the tar paper wall. The walls were written with the same pink paint that had been which had brightened the set for Cinderella. Billy's perceptions were so unreliable that he saw the words hanging in the air, painted on the transparent curtains perhaps, and there was tar paper to the shed. Billy could not imagine how the curtain was supported in nothingness, and he supposed that the magic curtain and the theatrical grief were part of some religious ceremony he knew nothing about. Here is what the message said. "Please leave the latrine as tidy as you found it." Billy looked at the latrine. The wailing was coming from in there. The place was crammed with Americans who had taken their pants down. The welcome feast had made them as sick as volcanoes. The buckets were full or had been kicked over. An American near Billy wailed as he excreted everything out but his brains. Moments later, he said, "There they go, there they go." He meant his brains. That was I. That was me, the author of the book. Billy reeled away from his vision of hell. He had passed 3 Englishmen who were watching the excursion festival from a distance. They were catatonic with disgust. "Button your pants," said one as Billy went by. So Billy buttoned his pants. He came to the door of the little hospital by accident. He went through the door and found himself honeymooning again, coming from the bathroom back to his bed with his bride and Cape Ann. "I missed you," said Valencia. "I missed you," said Billy Pilgrim. Like I said, this is a long chapter. Oh no. Oh, hold on. Billy and Valencia went to sleep, nestled like spoons, and Billy traveled back into time in the train ride he had taken in 1944 for the maneuvers in South Carolina to his father's funeral in Ilium. He hadn't seen Europe or combat yet. That was still in days of steam locomotives. Billy had to change trains a lot. All the trains were slow. The coaches stunk of coal smoke and rationed tobacco and rationed booze and farts of people eating wartime food. Upholstery of the iron seats were bristly, and Billy didn't sleep much. He got to sleep soundly when he was only 3 hours from Ilium, with his legs splayed toward the entrance of the busy dining car. The porter woke him up when the train reached Ilium. Billy staggered off with his duffel bag, and then he stood at the station platform next to the porter, trying to wake up. "Have a good nap, did you?" said the porter. "Yes," he said. "Man," said the reporter, "you sure had a hard-on." At 3 a.m, At 3 a.m. on Bill's morphine night in prison, a new patient had been carried into the hospital by 2 lusty Englishmen. He was tiny. He was Paul Lazaro, the polka-dotted car thief from Cercio, Illinois. He had been caught stealing cigarettes from under the pillows of an Englishman. The Englishman, half asleep, had broken Lazaro's right arm and knocked him unconscious. The Englishman who had done it was helping carry Lazaro in now. He had a fiery red hair and no eyebrows. He had been Cinderella's blue fairy godmother in the play. Now he supported half of Lazaro with one hand while he closed the door behind with the other. Doesn't weigh as much as a chicken. The Englishman with Lazaro's fee was the colonel who had given Billy his knockout shot. The blue fairy godmother, embarrassed and angry too. "If I had known I was fighting a chicken, I wouldn't have fought so hard." The blue fairy godmother spoke frankly about how disgusting all the Americans were. Weak, smelly, self-pitying, a pack of sniveling, dirty thieving bastards, he said. They're worse than the bleeding Russians. They do seem to scuffle a lot. A new German major came in. He considered the Englishmen as his close friends. He visited them nearly every day, played games with them, lectured to them on German history, played their piano, gave them lessons in conversational German. He told them often that if it weren't for their civilized company, he would go mad. His English was splendid. He was apologetic about the Englishmen's having to put up with the American enlisted men. He promised them that they would not have to be inconvenienced for more than a day or 2, that the Americans would soon be shipped to Dresden as contract labor. He had a monograph with him published by the German Association of Prison Officials. It was a report on the behavior in Germany of American enlisted men as prisoners of war. It was written by a former American who had risen high in the German Ministry of Propaganda. His name was Howard W. Campbell Jr. He would later hang himself awaiting trial as a war criminal. So it goes. Campbell would also he would be the main character in the spin-off of this book, which is Mother Night, talking about Campbell being in prison, and he's writing about the war and everything. While the British colonel said Lazaro's broken arm in mixed plaster for a cast, the German major translated out passages from Howard Campbell's monograph. Campbell had been a fairly well-known playwright at one time. He opened his His opening line was this one: America is the wealthiest nation on earth, but its people are mainly poor, and poor Americans are urged to hate themselves. To quote the American humorist Ken Hubbard, it ain't no disagreements to be poor, but it might as well be. It is in fact for a crime for an American to be poor, even though America is a nation of poor. Every other nation has folk traditions of men who are poor but extremely wise and virtuous, and therefore more estimable than anyone with power and gold. No such tales are told by American poor. They mock themselves and glorify their betters. The meanest eating or drinking establishment owned by a man who is himself poor is likely to have a sign on its wall asking a cruel question: if you're so smart, why ain't you rich? There will also be an American flag no longer than a child's hand glued to a lollipop stick and flying from the cash register. The author of the monograph, a native Stenston, New York, was said to be someone who had the highest IQ of all the war criminals who were made to face death by hanging. So it goes. Americans, like human beings everywhere, believe that many things are obviously true, the monograph went on. Their most attractive untruth is that it is very easy for any American to make money. They will not acknowledge how, in fact, hard money is to come by. And, therefore, those who have no money blame themselves. The inward blame has a treasure for the rich and the powerful, who have had to do less for their poor, publicly and privately, than any other ruling class since Napoleonic times. Many novelties have come across America. The most startling of these, a thing without a precedent, is a mass undignified poor. They do not love one another because they do not love themselves. Once this is understood, the disagreeable behavior of American enlisted men in German prisons ceased to be a mystery. Howard W. Campbell, Jr. now discussed the uniform of the American enlisted in the Second World War. Every other army in history, prosperous or not, has attempted to clothe even the lowest soldiers so as much to make them impressive, to make themselves as stylish experts in drinking and copulation and looting and sudden death. The American army, however, sends its enlisted men out to fight and die in a modified business suit, quite evidently made for another man. A sterilized but unpressed gift from a nose-holding charity which passes out clothes to drunks in slums. When a dashingly clad officer addresses such a frumpish-dressed bum, he scolds him, as an officer in the army must. But the officer contemplates it's not, as in other armies, a vernacular theatricity. It is a genuine expression of hatred for the poor, who have no one to blame for their miseries but themselves. A prison administrator dealing with captured Americans enlisted men for the first time should be warned. Expect no brotherly love, even between brothers. There will be no cohesion between the individuals. Each day will be a sulky child who often wishes that he were dead. Campbell told what the German experience with the captured American enlisted men had been. They were known to be everywhere and the most self-pitying, least fraternal, and dirtiest of all prisoners of war, said Campbell. They were incapable of concerting actions on their own behalf. They despised any leader among their own number, refused to follow or even listen to him, on the grounds that he was no better than they were, and that he should stop putting in the airs, and so on. Billy Pilgrim went to sleep, woke up as a widower in his empty home in Ilium. His daughter Barbara was approaching him for writing ridiculous letters to the newspapers. "Did you hear what I said?" Barbara inquired. It was 1968 again. "Of course," he said. He had been dozing. If you're going to act like a child, maybe we'll treat you like a child." "That isn't what happens next," said Billy. "We'll see what happens next." Big Barbara now embraced herself. "It's awfully cold in here. Is the heat on?" "The heat? The furnace, the thing in the basement, the thing that makes the hot air that comes out of the registers. I don't think it's working." "Maybe not." "Aren't you cold?" "I hadn't noticed." "Oh my God, you are a child. If we leave you alone, you'll freeze to death. You'll starve to death." And so on. It was very exciting for her, taking taking his dignity away in the name of love. Barbara was called the oiler burner man, and she made Billy go to bed, made him promise to stay under the electric blanket until the heat came on. She set the control on the blanket at the highest notch, which soon made Billy's bed hot enough to bake bread in. When Barbara left, slamming the door behind her, Billy traveled in time to the zoo in Traumaphador again. A maid has just been brought to him from Earth. She was Montana Wildhack, a motion picture star. Montana was under heavy sedation. Traumaphadorians wearing gas masks brought her in. Put her on Billy's yellow lounge chair, withdrew her through airlock. The vast crowd outside was delighted. All attendance records for the zoo were broken. Everybody on the planet wanted to see the Earthlings mate. Montana was naked, so was Billy, of course. He had a tremendous wang. Incidentally, you'll never know who'll get one. She fluttered her eyelids. Her lashes were like buggy whips. "Where am I?" she said. "Everything is all right," he said gently. "Don't be afraid." Montana had been unconscious during her trip from Earth. The Traumaphadorians hadn't talked to her, hadn't shown themselves to her. The last thing she remembered is her sunning herself in a swimming pool in Palm Springs, California. Montana was only 20 years old. Around her neck was a silver chain with a heart-shaped locket hanging from it, between her breasts. Now she turned her head to see the myriads of Traumaphadorians outside the dome. They were applauding her by opening and closing their little green hands quickly. Montana screamed and screamed. All the little green hands closed tight because Montana's terror was so unpleasant to see. The head zookeeper ordered a crane operator who was standing by to drop a navy blue canopy over the dome, thus simulating Earthling night inside. The real night came to the zoo for only one Earthling hour out of every 62. Billy switched on the floor lamp. The light from the single source through the baroque detailing of Montana's body to sharp relief. Billy was reminded of fantastic architecture in Dresden before it was bombed. In time, Montana came to love and trust Billy Pilgrim. He did not touch her until she made it clear that she wanted him to. After she had been on Traumaphador for what would have been an Earthling week, she asked him why shyly if he wouldn't sleep with her, which he did. It was heavenly. And Billy traveled in time from that delightful bed to a bed in 1968. It was in his bed in Ilium, and the electric blanket was turned up high. He was drenched in sweat, remembering groggily that his daughter had put him to bed and told him to stay there until the oil burner was repaired. Somebody was knocking on his bedroom door. "Yes?" "Oiler burner, man. Yes, running is good now. Heat's coming up. Good. Now say through the wire from the thermostat." "I'll be darned." Billy stiffed. His hot bed smelled like a mushroom cellar. He had a wet dream about Montana Wildhack. On the morning after the wet dream, Billy decided to go back to work in his office in the shopping plaza. Business was booming as usual. His assistants were keeping up with it nicely. They had started to see him. They had just been told by his daughter that he might not ever practice again. But Billy went into his examining room briskly, asked the first patient to be sent in. So they sent him one 12-year-old boy who was accompanying his widowed mother. They were strangers, new in town. Billy asked them a little about themselves. Learned that the boy's father had been killed in Vietnam in the famous 5-day battle for Hill 875 in Datco. So it goes. While he examined the boy's eyes, Billy told him matter-of-factly about his adventures in Traumaphador, assuring the fatherless boy that his father was very much alive. In moments the boy would see again and again. Isn't that comforting?" he asked. And somewhere in there, the boy's mother went out and told the receptionist that Billy was evidently going crazy. Billy was taken home. His daughter asked him again, Father, what are we going to do about you?" Okay, long chapter. We're just going to end it there.